Well, Sue, Ellen Browder, an award-winning journalist and author, joined us via phone to talk about her new book that is right here. Father had shown a little earlier, Subverted. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful, thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us. Tell us what made you decide to write Subverted.
Well, it's a conversion story. In the 1970s, I was working at Cosmopolitan magazine. And it was obvious to me and to anyone who was there at the time that the sexual revolution and the women's movement were two distinctly separate movements. You know, Helen Gurley Brown, who was the editor of Cosmo at that time, would have loved for her Sex Revolution magazine to be part of the women's movement. But Betty Friedan called Cosmo quite obscene and quite horrible. She was right about that. So how did those two radically separate movements ever get joined together? Well, and how did that play into the Roe v. Wade decision later? Well, after I became a Catholic in 2003, I became very curious about that. And I'd won a number of investigative journalism awards by that point, and so I started to dig into it. And that's why I originally began to write this book. How did those two separate movements get joined together? But when I took it to Ignatius, they wanted that story, but they also wanted my personal story. They wanted to know how an old Cosmo writer becomes a Catholic. And so the first part of this book I wrote because I wanted to know what happened, and I wanted to tell people about it. And the second story in this book is I wrote my personal story as penance.
Sue Ellen, this is Father Reed. You know, your book reveals a core issue, and this is something I didn't know, that abortion and contraception were not originally a part of the women's movement. How has this fact remained buried for 50-plus years?
Well, you know, on the one hand, I would say it hasn't been buried, that all this information is out there for anyone who wants to go to find it, and I just followed the paper trail. So all this book does is pull all this information together that wasn't there before. But on the other hand, as you're right, this fact has been buried. And it's been buried because it's very profitable for the multi-billion-dollar abortion birth control industries to bury it under mountains of propaganda. And so because of the massive amount, we don't think in this country that we have propaganda. We think that's something that was for Nazi Germany or for Russia. But in fact, all this public relations that is poured upon us constantly, we swim in a sea of this propaganda and we don't even see it around us.
Mm-hmm. You talk about your conversion story. Can you share a little of that with us?
Well, that's a very interesting story. And I had a beautiful marriage, and my beloved husband wanted to join the Catholic Church. And of course, I had a very strong meaning. And I had been propagandized for years and years because I worked for the women's magazines. And I said, I'm not going to join that patriarchal old church. And then I read the catechism, and this wasn't the Catholic Church that I'd heard about in the media. This was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. This was about love and forgiveness and joy, and I just fell head over heels in love with the Catholic Church. Mm. And I think, you know, Christ was searching for me, and a journalist is always searching for the truth if they're following their vocation. And I think Christ is the true goal of every investigative journalist in the world if they knew it.
You know, this year the theme of the March for Life is pro-life and pro-women go hand in hand. How much do you love that? I mean, that goes hand in hand with your book, doesn't it?
Well, I'm a keynote speaker there at the convention, and it does, because we're going to bring out the fact that the pro-life women's movement is the genuine feminist movement of the 21st century, and that's what we're going to be bringing out. It's not just pro-life and pro-women go hand in hand. Pro-life is the most authentic women's movement of the 21st century. The early suffragists were pro-life. Pro-family feminism, launched second-wave feminism. Betty Friedan, in the beginning, was pro-life before she was a propagandist got a hold of her by the name of Larry Lader, an abortionist. But she was pro-life, so the original women's movement in the 1960s was pro-life. The branch of the women's movement that opened up colleges to women was pro-life. We are the movement of the 21st century, and we need to talk about that.
Well, Ignatius has a great sale price on their website. Is that the best place for viewers to get their own copy of Subverted and learn more?
Sure. You can go to Ignatius.com, or you can go to Amazon. You can go anywhere. It's out everywhere.
Well, Sue Ellen, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your experiences in your book with us. And best of luck being the keynote speaker. That's great.
Yeah, it's going to be good fun.
Have a wonderful day.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
God bless you, Ellen. Thank you.